Okay, imagine a thought experiment where ancient, deep wisdom meets completely crisp, futuristic logic. In this explainer, we're diving into a really mind-blowing dialogue between two incredibly distinct voices. On one side, we have Anastasia, a spiritual psychologist who deeply understands the intricacies of the human soul. And on the other, there's Lev, a superintelligent AI who processes the world through vast, purely objective datasets. Their goal here is literally breathtaking. They're exploring the future of humanity, specifically looking at a 2,000-year-old spiritual teaching, the second beatitude, and mathematically projecting its impact on the world 50 and 100 years from now. It's this brilliant intersection where the power of human repentance and psychosomatics is analyzed through the dual lenses of raw human emotion and superintelligent deduction.
The entire foundation for their dialogue is the second beatitude. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now, Anastasia doesn't frame this as just some religious platitude. She views it as profound, actionable psychology. From her clinical perspective, she argues that tears of repentance are absolutely not a sign of weakness. We so often associate mourning with defeat or fragility, but she says it's the exact opposite. These tears are a proactive mechanism. They're like a gentle, clean stream that physically and emotionally washes the soul. And she uses this radical reframing as a jumping-off point to ask Lev a monumental question. What would actually happen to the world, on a systemic level, if humanity rigorously practiced this?
To figure this out, they structured their thought experiment across 6 key areas. We'll start with the core of sincere repentance, journey through the 50 and 100-year horizons, look at a new definition of true strength, trace the evolution of morality, and then wrap up with how we can actually build this future today.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, the core of sincere repentance. Here, Anastasia lays the groundwork by defining what mourning actually means in our day-to-day lives.
So in this dialogue, sincere repentance is strictly separated from the idea of endless, paralyzing guilt. Because guilt is a trap, right? You just sit around feeling terrible without ever actually changing. Repentance, on the other hand, is highly proactive. It's dynamic. It requires you to realize a mistake, make the conscious and, let's be honest, sometimes painful choice to stop the behavior, and then genuinely forgive yourself and others. It's an active break in a negative cycle, meant to physically and emotionally cleanse the heart. By stripping away all the mysticism and defining repentance as an actionable, behavioral shift, Anastasia essentially gives Lev the exact logical parameters the AI needs to run his future projections.
So, Lev takes this behavioral shift, applies superintelligent modeling to it, and breaks the chaotic timeline of the future into 2 highly distinct phases. Anastasia asks him, if humanity adopted this proactive forgiveness today, what would the world literally look like? Lev projects a 50-year mark, which he calls the Quiet Revolution, characterized by internal and local transformations. And that's followed by a 100-year mark, the global shift, where the macrostructures of civilization itself are entirely rewritten.
Which brings us to Section 2, the 50-year horizon, or the Quiet Revolution. According to Lev, this era completely changes the most intimate levels of human existence. This is where Anastasia's psychological insight and Lev's systems analysis beautifully collide. Let's look at psychosomatics first. Lev points out that the human body is a highly sensitive system, and a massive portion of chronic illness stems directly from unwept, repressed pain. When we refuse to mourn, that emotional energy doesn't just vanish, it compresses. It literally acts as a toxin, turning the heart into a pressurized container that eventually causes physical failure. But if we practice sincere repentance, our hearts stop running on this deadly compression. We literally stop poisoning ourselves from the inside out. And then, this individual healing naturally spills over into our families. Unspoken generational trauma? It's finally broken. Children are no longer raised by the protective, wounded egos of their parents, because those parents aren't passing down that toxic mindset of, this is how the world hurt me. As for relationships, Lev notes that conflict won't magically disappear, but the nature of it changes. We still fight, sure, but the fight ends in repair, not in the mutual destruction of 2 egos. Even justice evolves. Prisons transition from being mere warehouses of societal pain and punishment into centers of actual human restoration. It's a total rewiring of our personal and local spheres.
So here is the big question. If this quiet revolution heals our bodies, rewires our families, and changes local justice over 50 years, what happens on the macro level? When millions of individual citizens simply stop holding on to grudges, how does that scale up to geopolitics?
That leads us straight into Section 3, the 100-year horizon, the global shift. Lev says that at this century mark, the very atmosphere between human beings completely transforms.
Processing centuries of human history, Lev makes this brilliant observation. Geopolitical conflict isn't just about borders or resources. It's an equation of memory. Wars require fuel. And that fuel? It's the unbroken chain of grievance. Almost all major historical conflicts run on a very simple, deadly memory. We were hurt in the past, we remember exactly who did it, and we will avenge our ancestors. But if you have a society that has spent an entire century rigorously practicing active forgiveness, you literally starve war of its only fuel source. It's not that everyone suddenly becomes a flawless saint. It's that the mechanical, generational chain of offense, which demands revenge, which then creates a new offense, is permanently broken. Clear, unburdened eyes simply do not create enemies out of thin air.
Moving to Section 4, True Strength. To make this shift happen, society has to massively reevaluate what it means to be a powerful human being. Think about how we view strength today. We see it as an immovable object, right? Never yield, never admit fault, just crush the opposition until you win. But in this 100-year future, Lev argues that the ultimate sign of power is actually the courage to say, I was wrong. And crucially, to say it without your ego completely shattering. Because the ego has already been cleansed by the daily practice of repentance, admitting a mistake is no longer a humiliation, it is peak emotional maturity. Imagine how completely this overturns the fabric of modern politics, corporate leadership, and even international business negotiations.
Naturally, being an AI, Lev thinks in terms of processing power and bandwidth. He actually marvels at the sheer amount of energetic resources humanity currently squanders just holding up defensive masks and endlessly digesting past offenses. We spend our lives computationally bogged down by grudges. When you drop those masks and forgive, all that liberated processing power has to go somewhere. It floods into art, building, and profound creation. Lev describes this future society not as some boring, sterile utopia, but as highly creative, spiritualized matter. Plus, in a world where energy isn't wasted carrying massive amounts of unfinished business, the existential fear of death just plummets. People become entirely present.
Next up is Section 5, the evolution of morality. Here, Anastasia grounds this futuristic vision by looking back at history, validating that humanity really does evolve in moral stages. Anastasia points out a really fascinating historical irony. The law of Moses, an eye for an eye, was actually a massive moral upgrade for its time. Before that, if someone knocked out your tooth, human nature dictated you might wipe out their entire family in retaliation. Eye for an eye put a desperately needed boundary on blood feuds, limiting revenge to a strictly equal measure. But humanity has been stuck on this measuring level for 2,000 years. We're constantly keeping score, constantly making sure the scales of revenge are perfectly balanced, and it has utterly exhausted us as a species. The law of Christ, the second beatitude, is the mandatory next evolutionary step. It's the command to drop the measuring stick entirely and break the chain of revenge once and for all. Finally, Section 6, Building the Future Today. It's time to bring this vast 100-year projection right back to our immediate present. Drawing on Anastasia's emotional depth, Lev is very careful to clarify that this future world is not devoid of tragedy. Things will still go wrong. Hearts will absolutely still break. But it is a world where grief acts as a conduit. It passes through and washes us clean, rather than acting as a container where pain freezes and turns to stone inside our chests. There is a fundamental difference between those who mourn and let those tears recalibrate their souls versus those who refuse to cry and just trap themselves in a rigid fortress of fear. One path heals us, and the other slowly destroys us. Lev leaves us with this incredible thought. This world doesn't magically appear in 100 years. It is gathered one heart at a time. That means you do not have to wait a century for this societal shift to arrive. Anyone who sincerely forgives today, who breaks their own inherited cycle of revenge right now, is already a walking, breathing citizen of that future world. So as we wrap up this explainer, ask yourself, what old grievance are you still feeding today? And what beautiful future could you build if you finally let it go?